Hi there. I'm here today with Nonie Hokin. Nonie is the Managing Director of Corporate Language Services, and they provide services throughout Australia to people who are learning English on arrival in Australia, and also to people who are learning languages other than English as they prepare to move overseas, where they'll be needing those languages. So, Nonie, thank you for speaking with us. I wanted to ask... Oh, you're very welcome. I wanted to ask about when people are learning languages, or perhaps very specifically before people leave, when perhaps they first hear that they're going on an assignment and that they need to learn another language. What are the things that they can start doing at that point to really build the foundations for fluency?
Well, obviously, there are a couple of points that they need to think about, and that is if they've had any exposure to learning a language before, they'll know that they will need a certain amount of language training, but there are a lot of things that they can do prior to that point. One of the most important things is to attune their ear to the sounds of the language that they're going to be using, and they can do that quite effectively by taking out a few DVDs, listening to interviews on the web with people from those particular language groups. They can listen to radio, TV programs, anything that they can do to increase their exposure to the sounds of that language is going to help them.
Even if they can't understand it.
Absolutely. And they will find that with a small amount of language training, that is going to help them quite a bit.
Okay.
They may find that what they're doing is, with that small amount of language training, is identifying certain words that come up all the time that are going to help them to then try and figure out what the rest of the sentence means.
Yes.
But, it is a journey that they need to decide, how far down that track they need to go.
So for people who want to do that, how can you pick a good language teacher? Aside from, ringing you up in corporate language services.
The most important thing for someone choosing a language teacher is to look very carefully at the sort of qualifications that they have. It's so important that they pick a teacher that is teaching that language as a foreign language, and if possible, that teacher is a native speaker or at least bilingual.
Right.
Because if somebody is just going to get a young student who happens to be from that language group, they will not have necessarily, anyway, I mean they could, but most of the time they will not have that edge that is going to help them enormously in the way that they're going to be taught that language from the very beginning. If you take most of the Asian languages, which are tonal languages, for someone who's coming from the European language groups, for instance, there are very few reference points back to their own language. And so it is, really crucial that they get the right person for them. Someone who's empathetic, who understands themselves how difficult it is when you're in another country and having to cope with communicating in a different language.
So what about on arrival? When people arrive in a new country and they've got a little bit of language, but certainly not a lot, what tips or advice would you give for people to help them gain some of that language as quickly as possible?
Number one, don't panic. An awful lot of people will arrive there and think, well, hang on a minute, I thought I did a fair amount of work before I got here and I can't understand a word that they're saying.
Yes.
They're all speaking far too quickly for me, which is quite natural and normal when you're at the beginning stages of a language. Everything is going to sound far too speedy for your liking. I think the important thing is to, if you feel that you do need the help, that you seek it carefully and make sure that you get the right person to help you.
Yes.
And if you can possibly afford it, to do a one-on-one with your teacher rather than being in a group, because the group is not going to be as flexible as having a one-on-one situation. Just from a practical point of view, it means that you've got 1 in 18 or 1 in 25 or whatever the class size is, opportunity to actually practice your language, put it into practice. It's a tool of communication, and you need to have that dialogue with your teacher in as concentrated a form as you can, and it's really the most effective way to learn a language, especially when you're in full immersion.
What are some of the things you should be doing outside of the language lessons to aid the acquisition as fast as possible?
It's very important to make contact with the local community, to use the language that you have, even if you feel a bit embarrassed because it's so limited. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
People really appreciate it when you are trying to speak their language, and you'll find that they'll bend over backwards most of the time to help you and to help understand what you're trying to say. That gives you a really good exposure in putting the language into the cultural context as well. And you will soon find that there are many words that are used over and over again. So probably, we averagely we average about 500 words. We use about 500 words. And so over, a 3-month period, number one, you will become more aware of the sounds of the language, and be able to discern where one word finishes and another one begins, which is the other thing that a lot of people find really hard when they first arrive and coping with a new language. But it allows you to have a much more interesting language journey too.
It's quite encouraging that there's on average only about 500 words that we're using, because if you think about learning 500 words, that's achievable, whereas if you think of learning a language, then in my head you're learning thousands and thousands. So if I thought to myself I need to learn 500 words, I could think, oh, that's achievable. So that's an encouraging thought.
Yes, well, you can put that into simple sentence structures. The trick is not to make your sentences too complex, and not to try and run before you can walk. The whole point of the language is to communicate, and to communicate as clearly and as effectively as you can. So keep it simple.
So what do you suggest people might have as aids, if they're in another country? What would you suggest people have in their handbag or have in their backpack with them that will help them in that process?
Well, in this age of various different techno tools and toys, there are lots of pads that they can use effectively when they're out and about. Advertising signs, shop signs. If they are working with a teacher, then any good teacher will encourage them to go out and jot down any words that they see that they're not quite sure about, or new words, and to put it on their pad or a little tiny notebook that they keep in their pocket all the time, and just jot things down all the time, and then have a little session at the beginning of every lesson with their teacher where they go through that. And it's a huge learning experience for them, because they're building up that vocabulary all the time. And they feel that they've got some control and ownership over it, which is pretty important when you're feeling a bit vulnerable.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I'm certainly, when I think of learning, I'm certainly a write it in my little notebook sort of a person, so that would certainly be the way I'd be working. When it gets to the point, perhaps you've been there for a month or two, and you know how that stage of an assignment is always the tricky time, and often, I imagine with language as well, that you may feel that you're not really making progress. You're very aware of that. You're at that awareness of your incompetence, your conscious incompetence stage. What can you do to make things fun or to encourage yourself to keep going?
There are going to be stages where you sort of feel, oh God, am I ever going to master this?
Yeah.
When you get to that stage, just take a deep breath and realise, how far down that journey you've already come. And if you've come that far, then you can certainly go a lot further. But it is a question of perseverance.
Yes.
It's such an asset to have another language.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate all the information you've given. And your website is?
www.corporatelalanguageservices.com.au. Sorry about the mouthful.
Yes.
But anyway.
You get that sometimes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nonie.